you feel to land your first job in the Premier League and become the first American to manage in the Premier League also?
Well, first, I'm honored to be at Swansea City Football Club. That's first. The American side I can cover in 30 seconds, and then we can push that out the door, okay? With football in the United States, we've always understood we have to earn respect. And when I was with the national team, every time we got a chance to play in Europe, the players and I would understand today's one more day where we can show what the game is like in our country. And so if in some way this helps, I'm proud of what I've been able to do. So if that helps some people down the road, but this bit about pioneer and all the rest, I'm not an American manager, I'm a football manager, all right? And so now, when I come here, I realize that there's not one person in Swansea that could care less what anybody in the United States thinks at the moment, okay? They care about their football club, and man, I'm here to give everything I have for the fans, for the club, and I couldn't be more excited about the chance.
Okay.
So.
Presumably you were sitting in your office in France, the phone rang. Can you tell us who was on the end of the line and what did they say to you?
It's things happen fast in football, and there was a quick discussion on Saturday and Sunday, and as of Monday morning in Le Havre, nothing was final. And I went into the training center like I would every Monday morning with a game that night. And what I would typically do is go in and organize some things and then jump into the gym and have a little time to myself. And so I started to do a little bit in the gym. And at some point when I stopped, I saw that there was 2 missed calls from Vince Volpe, the president, the owner of Le Havre. So I called him, and he said that they had reached an agreement. And at that point, he said we had to figure out if I was coaching that night. There was a little back and forth. In the end, yes, I got to coach one more match. Fair enough, we won. So I feel good about finishing the job there, that part of the job, the right way. What I said when I was there is, in a perfect world, I would have finished the job there. I think most of you know, we got to the end last year, the last match of the season, fighting to go to League One, and we missed by 1 goal. And if I had my way, I'd have gone to the wall with that team again. Every job I've ever had, I've gotten to the end to try to reach the goal. But this time it was different. And, for me, I'm going to learn a lot more, but I know enough about Swansea City Football Club, all right? I had seen Jack to a King before this week, all right? I didn't wait until this week to find that and put it into my computer. And most of all, what I know is that when you have a club with a soul, a club that has real passion and real supporters, for me, that's special. And so the idea of coming to a club like that, and of course, to be in the Premier League, where you get challenged at the highest level, that meant that I needed, when the discussion got tough, to go to Mr. Volpe and talk about it. And I will always be indebted to him that he understood that in this moment, it was important to me. So,
a lot of big names, Bob, were linked with this job, the likes of Ryan Giggs. The club have already been known that they did speak to some of those names. What do you have that Ryan Giggs doesn't?
Well, you can't answer it that way. As you get older, what you learn is that you really understand who you are and what you're all about. And so I've been in enough interviews, and I never go in. Sometimes you your agent, he tries to coach you in an interview, and I tell him to shut the front door. And I make him understand that, look, I don't go into interviews to sell myself. I go into interviews to let people know who I am, to try to figure out who they are. And so, you know, I had a discussion with Hugh Jenkins. I enjoyed it. And then a few days later, I had a discussion with Jason and Steve and you. In both cases, I spoke about who I am. I spoke about how I see football, how I work. And look, I'll tell you one other part of those interviews. At the end of both of those interviews, I said, because I've been through this before, I said, let's be clear about one thing. I hope, and this was before the Liverpool game, I said, I hope you win. And I hope you keep winning. So it's not like you want a job because they've lost matches. All right? And I don't know Francesco Guidolin. I hope someday I get to meet him. I've heard he's a really good man. I certainly know he's a football man. I know what he's done in his career. And so I don't sit there at that point and hope that his team loses and he gets sacked. I hope they win and he's here. But at the end of that, when I say that, it's because, you know what? I want people to know who I am. And then at the end, if at some point along the way they think, you know what? There's something about that guy that might fit, okay, then maybe I get a chance. But I've never gone into one interview where I thought, how am I going to try to sell myself? I think that's not the way it works.
At the risk of taking up more than 30 seconds about your nationality, the club does have American owners. There'll be people who suggest that your appointment increases the profile of the club in America. Do you think that has played any part?
Well, it will increase the profile in the U.S. I think that part still has a plus to it. Swansea City Football Club has gained a bunch of supporters this week. All right, they're not as hardcore as the Jack Army yet. Okay, but hopefully you'll get them there. All right. When the news came out that Jason and Steve had become majority owners, like you, I read the news. I knew a little bit about Jason because obviously he's got a role at DC United. I knew less about Steve. But when you sit and you talk with guys like this, what hits you right away is why they've been successful. They're smart. And again, as new owners, as new American owners, just like anybody else, they have a learning curve. But I'm impressed by their understanding of what the club's all about. I got a real sense that their vision is going to work nicely with what the club has always been about. And I don't think that they'd have gotten to where they are by making decisions with their heart, right? So, could it have played a role? The one thing for sure is it meant that they would know a little more about me, and for the different times that my name has, you guys have written my name a few times in the last few years, I promise you, all right? And most of the time, I never got on the short list, okay? Maybe once. And the reason I never got on the short list is just because, and look, there's a couple reasons. You have a lot of great managers to pick from in the Premier League. And so that's fair. I could never argue that. In those kind of situations, the decision makers may not know who I am, and they may not actually look very hard. So look, it would sometimes come out that I was frustrated about lack of opportunity. The word frustrated was wrong, okay? I was never frustrated about it. I always felt like, look, I have to earn it. I have to continue to work. Maybe somebody someday is going to say, you know what? I watched this team play. When I finished with Egypt, I was determined to put my foot in the door with a club team in Europe. Right? And I finished with Egypt at the end of 2013. And, looking for jobs in November, that's not always so easy. And I got in some discussions. There were interest from one or two MLS teams. And then this beautiful little club called Stabæk showed some interest. And every one of my trusted advisors and friends said, you're crazy if you go there, all right? You have no chance. They're just up from the second league. Financially, they hit rock bottom. Their team's no good. And I thought, listen, I believe in my work. I'm going to prove myself, and I'm going to do it in Europe, all right? And at that time, one of the things I thought about was, it might be a small team in Tippeliga, but there's a good chance that some days there's going to be 10 scouts, some days 12, some days 20. And maybe they're going to see a team that plays good football. Maybe they're going to see some players that are improving. And maybe they're going to go back to the sport director or whoever and say, you know what? There's something going on at Stabæk that's interesting. So, I went to Stabæk for that reason. And I went to Stabæk because, ironically enough, their story, it's not exactly the same as Swansea City, but I'll tell you what, it's got similarities. There was a group of guys 20-some years ago that had this idea that they could take this little club called Stabæk from the 5th league to the 4th league to the 3rd league and get them into the top league. And they did it. And then, as is often the case, maybe they got ahead of themselves, maybe the financial winds changed, and all of a sudden they crashed. And then they went down, and then so I was brought in there to talk to them at the end of the season where they were going back up. And the first thing I saw was that some of those guys, Ingebrigtsen Jensen, Knut Harlem, they were all there. They hadn't disappeared. They were front and center, and they felt just the same way about their football club as they did when they had that dream. And I loved being part of Stabæk for 2 years. I'm proud of what we did. The first year they said, you're going down. We were mid-table. We made the semifinal of the cup. The second year, we competed to win the league. At the end, last day of the transfer window. Actually, the funny part of it is the transfer window closed in Europe, I think, on a Sunday night. And as I was leaving, they said to me, transfer window's over. You didn't lose any players. And I kind of smiled, and as I was walking away, I thought, you know what? It's still open in England for one more day. And I got in the next morning, and the sport director came and said, Hull City just called about Dio. Right? Dio is Adamo Diamande. We had taken him in that year from Dynamo Minsk, where his career had crashed. And we got him in, and in 22 games, he had scored 17 goals. And so on the last day of the transfer window, when Hull arrives, and someday I'm going to ask Steve Bruce if he had ever seen him play before that day. Okay. They made Stabæk an offer that a small club that has no money couldn't refuse. So it's football. We sold our leading goal scorer. Last 8 games, we've had 2 games with Rosenborg. Great games. We lost 1-0 in the league, 3-2 in overtime in the cup semifinal. We ended up with a bronze medal. We ended up qualifying for Europa League qualifying. But my 2 years there were special. And so when I go into any job, right, I go in to get to know the people, get to know the club, get to know the supporters. It's not about me. Right? I get that. I'm not a football manager that goes in with a huge ego. I go in to try to work and give everything I have to what's there. So.
Last year. And secondly, do you think he would be a good fit for another job going over here as England manager?
That's the trickiest question that's been asked so far. From the day I got fired by the U.S., I've not said one thing publicly about their team. Right? I don't appreciate the way it was done. I think they made a mistake. I'm glad that Jurgen says some nice things now. When he did commentary on the 2010 World Cup, he was already jockeying for the job. So I've shut my mouth, continued to support the team because I, of course, want to see the team do well. Michael's the captain. So if he's said something in a nice way, I appreciate it. And if at some point he chooses to try to work again outside the U.S., I wish him the best.
I wonder about the makeup of your backroom staff. Are you going to bring some guys in, or is there anything you can tell us about that at the moment?
Sure. So in a couple days, I'm trying to get to know so many people. That part's been great. I'm impressed with a lot of the things that are happening inside the club, the sports science, the attention to detail in many things. I have an interest to add one or two coaches, right? Perhaps one where I'm familiar, but I also think that maybe an additional coach has to come where there's more Premier League experience. So we're in discussion. For me, Alan Curtis is going to be really important. He's going to be, he's going to be my older brother in this thing. He's only a little older though. But his sense of the club, his eye, his experience, that's going to be important. So I'm working on getting the right balance. What I'm not doing is this. I'm not bringing in like my whole staff. There's been a shift. Maybe in some cases, dependent upon what your last name is, you can bring in 3 or 4 or 5. But I think, I remember in some of the moments when I did speak to clubs here, the sense of trying to make sure that there's stability, the sense of having a football staff in place that doesn't change every time a manager changes, I think that's important. So I see good things at Swansea City. If I can find the right guys to add to that, not to push guys away, but to just add in there, I'm interested to do that. I've had good discussions with you about it, so ongoing.
I've read this football club then. How important is unity between the supporters and those who run the club? Because I'm sure you'll be aware of the angry statement put out by the Supporters Trust regarding Francesco's departure from the club.
Yes, listen, it's the number one thing, right? For a club to have any chance to be successful, you have to have a connection with your supporters, with your city, with your community. This is what it's all about. I've not worked in the Premier League, but the first professional head coaching opportunity I got was Chicago. And when I went to Chicago, the first thing I said is, we need to have a connection with the city. The first player that I signed was Peter Nowak. He was captain of the Polish national team. Immediately, the Polish community in Chicago was all in, right? We won the double the first year. You looked into the Soldier Field, Section 8, and you felt a connection. And you thought, okay, now we have something. It was the first year of a club, But I knew that that was important. I knew it was important in every club I've been. I knew when I went to Stabæk it was important. And man, I know that that's more important than anything here. And if I start, look, if they're angry right now, I get it. Okay, I said already, I have full respect for Francesco. Okay, and now I will do everything to earn their respect. Be clear about one thing. No matter what your name is, if you come to the Premier League, you still have to earn respect. Okay, it's not given to you. A name might sound good at the beginning, but I'll tell you what, you guys are too good at what you do. All right? You're not letting anybody off the hook easy. So you don't come in and just get handed something, okay? You get tested. And I'm excited for that. Listen, I in everything I've done in life, I have fully understood that you have to earn respect, all right? I'm not going to give you a long family history, but I tell you a little bit. You know, my father's real parents were from Scotland. I think the Docks, so maybe that's why I'm thinking I can be a good coach, okay? Because if you got relatives that come from Govan, that helps, I think. Anyway, at some point, after my father's born, his real family can't take care of him. He gets put in a state home with his brother in the ward. And he goes in with a family, and, you know, he gets out of high school, and he ends up in the Marines. He's in Korea. He gets a Purple Heart. He marries my mom, and we have 3 boys, right? And I'm the oldest. My father never talked about the Marines. He never talked about his upbringing. The only thing that mattered to him was that we understood what was right. We understood that in order to get anywhere in life, you had to work hard and you had to fight for respect. And I learned that lesson from my dad. And so I get that part. And like I said, I come here, I'm going to be myself, and I'm going to try to show everybody every day, listen, this is what we're going to try to do.